Welcome everyone to the Xojo webinar. I am Paul Lefevre, the Xojo Developer Evangelist. And our topic today is making a multi-platform app. So what is a multi-platform app? Well, I'm going to define that as an app that can run on a desktop. That's, Macintosh, Windows, Linux. An app that can run on the web, so in a web browser. And an app that can run on a mobile device. And in our case, that'll be iOS. So what is the app that we're going to build today? Well, this is going to be a simple app that'll display the blog feed for the popular Daring Fireball website, a source of Apple News and other things. So the overall UI design is going to we're going to show the feed, the blog feed. So that'll be the list of the blog post titles. And then you'll be able to click on a title to show the blog post. So pretty simple from a UI standpoint. And the feed itself, we're going to grab that from the internet using an HTTP socket. The Daring Fireball feed is in JSON format. So we're going to grab it right from there. We're going to parse that out, and then we will display the post titles in the UI. And then we'll also save the actual blog post itself. We'll save the HTML so that it can be easily displayed in the UI when you click on a title. So what's the Xojo Advantage here? Well, the desktop app is going to have, I don't remember counting exactly, but it's about 25-ish lines of code, not counting comments and stuff. So pretty compact here. And of course, the desktop app is going to run on Windows, macOS, and Linux without any modifications at all. The web app is also about the same amount of code. And actually, most of the code is exactly the same as the desktop. And then lastly, the iOS app is a little bit more code because we're going to have two screens since we're going to build it for a phone, and we're going to have one screen that'll show the list of blog posts and then a second screen that will display the content when you tap on one of the titles. So a little bit more code in the iOS app. But again, most of the code is the same or very similar to desktop and web apps. So let's jump into Xojo and build these things. All right, so we'll start with the desktop app. So I have Xojo open here, and I have desktop selected. Now I'll just give it an app name and create a project. And then find the window and drag it onto the screen. So our app is only going to need a single window, and I'll just have a few controls on it. So I'm going to add a label here to the top. This will just show the name of the blog. It'll grab the blog name right from the JSON feed. We use a list box to show the blog post titles, an HTML viewer to display the blog post when you click on it. And then lastly, I'm going to drag this odd looking icon right here, a generic object over. This will show up on the shelf, and that's going to be our socket once we update some of the properties here. So now I can switch over to the inspector and update properties. So we just want to give everything nice, easy names. This is going to get replaced with the blog title when the JSON is loaded, so we can just put a placeholder there. We'll call that feed list. I'm going to have two columns on here. And I'll turn on the headings. and then we'll name the columns. So the first column will just be the title, and then I'll press tab here. Doesn't really show, but there's a tab in between there so that it hits the second column, and then the headings here will be the title and the date, which we'll again grab from the JSON. I'll call the HTML viewer article viewer. I'm also going to set the locking on that to all the corners, so that increases in size as the window's resized. I'll also lock this to the edge as well. And then I can give the window a title. So that's the overall UI layout. And now down here in the bottom, we have the generic object that we added on here. So this isn't anything in specific yet. We have to actually assign it something. So this is going to be our socket. So we're going to call this feed socket because this is going to connect to the internet. And we just have to manually type in here the class that we want it to actually be. So you can see when I set it super to be the Xojo.net.http socket, the icon over here changed a little bit, and it's now an actual HTTP socket that we can use to connect to the internet. And now that we have that, we can actually start to put some code on here. So on the HTTP socket, I can click on that and add event handlers, and here I'm going to add the error and the page received event handlers, so I can just command click on both of those to add them at once. And the error handler, I don't need anything fancy here, so I'm just going to throw a message box up. Just in case something goes wrong. And most of the code here is going to be in the page received event, where this is going to take the content. So when it's going to send a request out to the Daring Fireball server, Daring Fireball server will get that request and then send some data back to our socket. And that data is going to come back here in the content parameter that's passed in to this event. So I'm actually going to cut and paste this code, and then we'll go through it. All right, so here we have the code. Not a lot of code, but a few lines I want to cover here. So first, we're just checking the HTTP status is 200. That means, okay, everything came back as expected. Now, the data that is being returned is in a memory block, and we actually know that the Daring Fireball server in this case is returning to us JSON, and that's textual. So we want to first convert that memory block data down to text. So we can do that by using a text encoding. So on the Xojo.core.text encoding class, there is a shared method called UTF-8 that will essentially say that's the UTF-8 encoding. And we want to convert the data to the UTF-8 text encoding. So that's what that line of code there is doing. And that ends up with us having some text that is the actual JSON text. And then the next line here is going to parse that JSON text as JSON into an actual dictionary so that we can use the dictionary to find the items we want in the JSON. And then we clear the list box, and then we can chug through here. But before we do that, I'm going to click this link here so you can see what the JSON actually looks like, so we know what values we're looking for. So you can see here, there's a few things we're going to grab. We're going to grab the title, so we can show that up there. And then the other thing is right here, you can see the items. And when you look at JSON, you can see there's usage of the curly bracket here, and then the kind of the square bracket. And whenever you see a square bracket, this indicates that this is an array of information in the JSON, and each chunk of information is encased in its own little set of squirrely brackets. So items here means that this is an array of these chunks of data, which is each of the blog posts. So you have a title, you've got a URL, and you actually got the content of the blog post in HTML format. So all that's in the JSON feed that we're getting back. So you can see here, this line of code is grabbing the title directly from the dictionary that that JSON is mapped to. And then the next step here is looping through that array, which was the items part that we looked at. So I create an array. I have to set the type as auto, and then I can assign to it the items right from the dictionary. And then I can just iterate through each of the log entries essentially in my items array. And I can grab the values I want, which in this case, I'm going to grab the title and the date published so I can display those in the list box. And then in the row tag of the list box, I'm going to grab the actual HTML content for the post and stick that right in the row tag so we can grab it later when the row's clicked on to display it. So that's what this code does. This is, like I said, most of the code that's in the app. The next thing we want to do is actually request the data from the server. So we're going to send a request to the server. And we're going to send that to the URL. Oopsies. I'll grab it from here. There. So this is going to send a request to the server using our socket, which will then get the data back in the page received event. So if we were to run this right now, we'll get the data back for all the headlines, blog post titles that are here. When we click on them, it's not doing anything yet because we didn't put any code on the list box. So that would be the next thing we'll add. So on the list box, when you click on rows in there, the change event is what is called. So I'm going to add that event handler here. And that has enough code that I will also not attempt to type that. And there you go. That's the 4 lines of code that's needed to display the actual blog post. So you can see here, it's making sure that an actual row in that list is clicked, so you didn't click outside of any rows. It grabs the content back from the row tag that we previously stored there, and then it loads that content into the article viewer, which is the HTML viewer for display. And that's it. That's the running desktop app now. And you can see that how that works. Now we're going to jump over and make the web version, and you're going to see it's going to be almost exactly the same as this desktop version. So here I'm going to add a new project. And we've got this one here. I'm going to keep this right up here, as I'll probably even copy some stuff from it. And we can have kind of the same layout. So I can have a label here at the top. Also a list box. And also an HTML viewer. And again, the need to all get named. Want that to have 2 columns, just like the desktop version. We can set the width, just like the desktop version. Changing the column headings is a little different. I click the edit button here to get the editor. I can also lock that while I'm in there. And lock all that as well so it resizes, and I can give the entire web page a name. That kind of matches the original UI layout we had for the desktop version. Now, the other thing we also are going to need on the web version is, of course, the socket to connect. So this is a web app. It's running on its own server somewhere. And it can still communicate with other servers on the internet, of course. And we're going to have it do that. Now, the code for the socket actually is exactly the same as the code we have on the desktop app. So I can actually just click here on the socket. And I'm hitting Command C here to copy it. And then I can just come here to the web page and paste that in. And you can see it'll have the code and everything, which won't need any changes. So we can leave that there. And then to kick that off, I again want to do that when the page is loaded. In this case, I'm going to use the shown event handler. But that's also the same code that I have here in the open event handler. So I can just copy that single line and paste that in here. So now when the user connects to the web app and that page is shown, it's going to kick off the request, and that will result in the page received event coming back with some data that gets parsed and displayed, same as before. Now we can run that here, and oh, I named this wrong, so let's fix that. I had an S at the end. So let's run that again. And you see the pages came up again. And of course, clicking doesn't do anything yet because, again, we didn't add that code. So we can do that now. And that code is on the list box, just like before. The event name is named slightly different. It's selection changed. So I can add that one. And the code is pretty similar here. Not exactly the same. So I just copy and pasted the code from the desktop. If I try to run, I believe I get a compile error here, yeah. And you can see on this line, it's telling you there's too many arguments. If I hover over the load page, you can see on the web HTML viewer, it only has one parameter, just the content. It doesn't need a folder item. So I can just remove that. And then run it again. And again, that works same as the desktop app. Of course, with this one, it's on the internet. Multiple people can connect to it and all that good stuff. All right, the last version of this we want to make is the iOS version. And as with all things mobile, setup's a little bit different here. So by default, we've got our initial view. I mentioned we're going to have two views, but we'll start with the first one here. And our main view is just going to show the list of the blog titles. So I'm going to add a table here and resize it to fill up the whole area. And then I'm going to switch over to the inspector for the view. I'm going to turn on the navigation bar here, and I can give it a title. We can change that with the name from the feed that we'll get back. I can rename the table here, call that feed table. I can take a glance at the auto layout rules to see if they need any adjusting, and they look okay here. I get the top auto layout rule is set to the top layout guide with a small gap, and the bottom one is also set to the bottom layout guide, and the left and right are matched to the parents left and right. So it did that automatically when I dragged everything in here. If I needed to tweak that, I could just click on them and edit them, but those look correct. And then I also need to add the socket. So I can drag that in here. Just like I did in the desktop app. And I can also add same event handlers. In this case, there's an error. I'm just going to jump into the debugger for our purposes right now. And I need to switch grab this slightly different code that's needed for the iOS one. Now, the iOS code here in the page received event is doing largely the same thing, but setting up an iOS table is a little bit different than setting up the list box that you do in desktop and web projects. So you can see the code at the beginning is the same here. We're getting the data back and we're converting it to text and then parsing it into a dictionary, parsing the JSON into a dictionary. And then we remove anything that happens to be in the table, and that's the remove all method. Set the view's title to be the title from the JSON. And then here for the table, I'm just adding a blank section so that there's no section header actually appears. And then the same thing, iterating through the items. So I assign the items and then I iterate through them. But there's a little bit more code here to populate the table because I'm creating a cell. And I'm putting in there the title and then the date I'm putting in the smaller detail section that shows underneath. And I'm still sticking the HTML in the tag. So overall the steps are the same, just a little bit different details. And then I add that row to the table so it displays. So that's the slight difference that iOS has for the big block of code here. Now if I try to run this, give it a second to do its build and then kick off the iOS simulator. And actually, I expected an error, not an empty feed viewer. So that's always funny. I did expect an error because, we didn't call the thing. That's right. So I missed a step. I got to add the open event handler like I did on the other one. So let's go back and do that. So open event handler is the same as the shown and the code in the open event of the desktop one. So let's do that here now. So when I run this here, I do think this is when an error appears. Yeah, here we go. We dropped into the debugger in the error event handler. And like, well, why is that? So let's take a look. What do we have here in the parameter? And it looks like if I click on one of these here, it says an SSL error has occurred and it can't connect to the server. Now, it turns out when I was first testing this, I was rather confused, but in the end, I actually contacted John Gruber, the guy who writes all the Daring Fireball stuff. And it turns out his server actually isn't quite configured properly to communicate with iOS apps and their higher level of security. And we went back and forth a bit on Twitter about it, and all he basically ended up saying was, hey, thanks for letting me know about this. Eventually, I'll get around to upgrading the server. So what does this mean for us? Well, there's a way around this. We can just tell our iOS app that to use a different level of security when connecting to this website. So if we see here in my folder, I've got an info plist that I've created, and let's display that. So I've created an info plist that has essentially an exception for the Daring Fireball domain that tells it to use a different version of TLS. As I think 1.2 is what it wants to use by default, and we're saying, hey, we're going to allow 1.0 in this particular case. And what we can do here is we can just drag this plist that I've created onto the project, and it'll show up in here in the navigator. And when the app is built and everything, this will be incorporated into the built app, and then those settings will get used. So if we just run it again, I'm expecting we'll actually see the blog post titles in the table. And there they are. Again, still doesn't do anything because we didn't finish coding. So let's move on to our second view to actually display what the user clicks on. So I want to add a view here. And I'll turn the navigation toolbar on. This will allow a back button to show up so we can get back to the list. And here I'm going to add the HTML viewer. And what I want to do here is I got one method that we're going to put on this. And what we're going to do here is when the user taps on a row, a blog post title on view 1, we're going to pull back the HTML content, call a method on our article view, and use that to display the article content itself in the HTML viewer. So this is the method here, set content, passing in the actual HTML content. And on iOS, what we need to do here is we actually need to take that and save it to a file somewhere on the device. So I'm just saving it within the apps documents folder. Always the same name, so it's just going to overwrite since we're not showing more than one at any time. No need to create a bunch of files on the device and waste space. And then, so I use a text output stream to just create that and write it out. And then I tell the HTML viewer to load that file by using its URL path. So it loads it that way, and then it gets displayed. So this is how the article view works. The last step is on the feed table to add the event handler for when they tap on a row. That's the action event handler. And here we do what we did in the other ones. We grab the content from the tag. So that's the HTML content for the selected row. And then we create a new article view, call the set content method, passing in our content, and then push it. This causes it to slide over the current view and have that back button displayed so we can get back. So let's run this. And I can read the post. And go back. And that's it. So that's 3 apps for multi-platform, totally different platforms. You get desktop, you get web, you get mobile iOS, all built using a single tool, Xojo, with very similar code so that you can kind of bang these out somewhat rapidly. You can always reach me at paul@xojo.com, on Twitter, @LaFever. Be sure, if you haven't already, grab the latest version of Xojo. Head on to xojo.com/download. Enter an email real quick and you'll be able to download Xojo. Current version is 2017, release 2.1. And you can build your own apps however you want using Xojo. And I also like to remind everyone about XDC. We're nearing the end of the month, just a few more days until the end of September 2017. And that's also when the early bird discount for XDC registrations kind of expires. So if you're thinking about attending, save yourself some money. Head on over to xojo.com.xdc. Take a look at the sessions that are going to be presented, who the presenters are. There's about 30 to 35 sessions. I don't have the exact number in front of me. And sign up now, save some money. It's next year, April 25th to 27th in Denver, Colorado. Thanks everyone for attending. Have a great day.